Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fractional Podcast. I'm your host, Lance Robbins. Co-host Joshua Wold is not with us today, but I am joined by a super interesting character I'm really excited to introduce to you. Vito Peleg is the co-founder and CEO at Atarim, and Vito and I have kind of crossed paths here and there in the WordPress ecosystem, in the agency space. But I recently at WordCamp US had a chance to actually, really connect with Vito and heard his story and thought, you know what, this is a great story. We want to hear this here. So Vito, super happy to have you. Tell us a little bit more about
Thanks, Lance. It's
Atarim
a
and
pleasure
what
to
do you
be here.
do?
Thanks for inviting me. With Atarim, we help design teams and creative operations to streamline their work through visual collaboration and workflow management. What does that mean? In the sentence, basically, it means that we allow, or you can think about this like comments inside Google Docs only throughout the entire web. And that allows you to kind of click any part of any page, leave a comment right where the request is, so that the other side doesn't need to deal with back and forth and spreadsheets and Google Docs and all of these kind of nonsense that bogs down projects dramatically. And now there's 67,000 teams that are using our solution with 1.7 million of their team members, stakeholders, and clients. And yeah, a lot of the folks that are using our solution are exactly the folks that are watching this, from the smaller agencies to the small teams that are a little bit too stretched doing their day and so on.
Perfect. That's awesome. Yeah. So you're a little bit different from our typical guest who's maybe a solopreneur who's been running their business as an individual. Right here, you've built a team and you're empowering small
But I was
teams
that for many
to do
years
their
as well.
work. But I think there we go, right? So you were that for many years and now you've seen the transition and the growth. But what I perceive is that you're truly an entrepreneur at heart. And whether that looks like a big team, a small team, an individual, a lot of the principles and lessons that you've picked up over the years are going to be super applicable. So I'm excited to kind of get into that. But I'd kind of just love to start like with your story. What led you to say, hey, I think I'm going to do this for myself versus I'm going to, work in this more stable, secure job scenario? How do we get from
So I
there
think that
to
the
where we're at
only
today?
job I had a couple of jobs in my early 20s. I was a salesperson at a guitar shop, and I ran a billabong shop in a mall, for for almost a year. But the vast majority of the time, I had businesses of my own. In fact, the first one was when I was 9. And we were selling these bracelets to other kids in school at the time until the teachers had to stop us. And then the next one was I realized that I was the only one that was able to draw when we were doing like the yearbook in sixth grade. And so I sold those drawings to all of the other kids. And so during our year, almost everyone had the drawings that I did, but they all paid for it at the time. So that was my first freelancing design business back then. And I've had businesses since then and until now. And most of them were small, exactly as you're describing, one person, two people. The largest one before this one was my agency, where we had 12 folks before we pivoted into product. And I always loved the concept of being my own boss. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad when I was 14, and that kind of set me up on this trajectory and journey since then, really.
Yeah, one of the first business books that I listened to, audio style, was the Rich Dad Poor Dad as well. It got introduced a lot of
Yeah.
new concepts
Great
to me when
intro.
I was pretty
Yeah.
young too. So that's great. So yeah, great intro. It definitely makes the contrast clear. Interesting to hear about your school age entrepreneurship, because Joshua has school age kids, I have school age kids, and we're always thinking about like you could do a business. So my daughter, in fact, if you listen to our podcast, there's an intro
Right.
jingle. My daughter's a musician, you're a musician, but she actually wrote the jingle and we paid her to to
That's
produce the
awesome.
jingle for us. And so we have that. And my son is only 7, but he's begging me, Dad, can you get a snowplow blade for the 4-wheeler? Because then when I'm a little bit older, I could plow the neighbors' driveways. So I think we're going to be starting a snowplow business at some
I
point,
love
whether
that.
I want to or not.
When I was kind of in middle school, I asked my dad to buy me a CD burner, which was like cutting edge at the time. That was my birthday gift, and it took
Mhm.
45 minutes to burn a CD. If you remember back in the day. And then and I made that into a business as well. It was the era of Napster, so I would download the top 20 songs, and every month I had these CDs that were printed out and sold to a few kids in school. And yeah, and that was my first realizations of how not to just sell, but to create some sort of a repeatable, recurring model. Because every month you have a new top of the chart, so every month you could go to this and sell to the same folks with the new songs, and keep a customer base rather than keep looking for the next customer every time.
No, that's so cool and also nostalgic at the same time. I love it. Love it. So there's an event that I actually had the pleasure of speaking at a couple of years ago, that you designed and have put together. Tell us a little bit about the agency summit. What is it like? What is it for? And really the story that I'm really
Right.
excited for you to share is
So,
how it got
so
started.
the Web Agency Summit is the largest event out there for website agencies. We have around 10,000 attendees that are joining this every year, and it's an online event. You even spoke there. It was a privilege to have you as a speaker there a couple of years ago as well, Lance. And the whole thing kicked off because when I first launched the product, we were initially a WordPress plugin at the time, and things were doing pretty well. So after running the agency and experiencing all of these problems of getting the clients to give us all the information and to give us the feedback on the work that we did, we kind of boiled it down to why can't they just click any part of the page and leave a comment where the problem is, and it was just a nice idea, so we built it, and it worked like magic for us. So we brought this to market. It ended up being the biggest launch in the history of WordPress at the time, or still, I guess. And things were going very well in the early days. And so I said, all right, I like going to events. I love the concept of the community and building that around the company. I enjoy going out exactly like we met. We saw each other in person a couple of weeks ago, and just going around, shaking hands, learning about what people do, and figuring out what we can do together to help advance both of us. There was a big event for WordPress that was scheduled for a few months after we started. It was in Thailand, and to me that was like, all right, this is where we're gonna do the real launch. Let's go there, and we bought the sponsorship, and we bought tickets for a few. We were like 3 team members at the time. I wasn't even on the payroll back then, but we said, all right, let's meet up in Thailand. We had a couple of subcontractors that were working in Asia. That would be a good opportunity for the entire team to kind of meet together somewhere. And we got the whole thing together, shipped swag over there. And then 2 days before the event, COVID happened and the whole thing got canceled. And if you remember back in the day, it was a matter of like, no one knew if you're going to get those refunds from the flight companies, from the hotels, from any of these kind of stuff. There was literally boxes of swag sitting at a venue in Thailand that you couldn't get to. And so to me, it was like, we might need to close down even before we started, just on the back of this ambitious kind of campaign and that we kind of planned out to do over there. And that was pretty much a do or die. And we started I started thinking like, what else can I do so we don't have to shut it off as soon as we're just starting. And so I reached out to the organizers and I told them, how about we just make this a virtual event? It wasn't a big thing at the time. I didn't want to do like a Zoom kind of like stacked up webinars. So I spent the following 3 weeks basically building a platform to allow us to run this online event. And
Because you didn't have a lot of options at the time,
yeah,
right? Like you mentioned Zoom, but there's
now
a number of platforms now for large virtual events. But
Yeah,
at the
there was
time, this
nothing
was
out
a
there
new
that would do
concept,
all
right?
of this. And really what I wanted is to kind of replicate that human experience, not only the sessions, but also the hallway track and the ability for people to connect with each other in a nice way, have the sponsors being able to connect and not just have a logo on a page or something like that. And so it needed a platform. And so I went on to build that. The folks that organized the event didn't want to pick up the gloves. I said, all right, we'll do it on our own. We have to do it. So I called up a few friends, and GoDaddy was a big sponsor at the time. WP Engine came in, SiteGround, Host, and a few other players from the space came. They already had the budget. They already planned on doing something during that time. And so that was kind of a nice, easy win that actually saved the company. And we went off thinking that it was going to be about 500 people, 400 people that are going to join. But it ended up being 3,500 people that tried to log in the first hour of the event. The whole thing crashed, Lance, on the first hour. But fortunately, we had the biggest hosting companies in the world as sponsors in a Slack channel on the side. And they're like, are you guys on AWS? Let me bring my AWS guy. And we ended up working with like C-level at AWS to figure out how to get the event back on track. But within an hour, it was back on there. And we even added a day on the back of this. It was just such a thrilling kind of thing to do because everyone came together and especially if you remember at that time, there was so much uncertainty around the world that it felt like something really special is starting. And and then we had those 3,500 first year, then it went for 5,000, 7,500 the year after, 1,000 the following year. And yeah, it just became a thing that we do every year. It's our way of giving back to the community, like you have this podcast here.
So you strike me as the kind of person that says, if someone says you can't do it, you'll be like, hold my beer, and you will, and you'll find a way. Is that kind of do you see that as a theme through your life? Is that, or is it in the face of, I
Right. So
have to
I think that
succeed?
if you have multiple options, then a lot of times you would go with the easiest one. But if you have that mentality of like, I have to get this done, then you just do whatever it takes. And to me at the time, that meant 3 weeks of very little sleep, 3 hours of sleep to just build a literal platform to run something like that, which was completely unrelated to the product, by the way, but just was like a way of just saving that from a bootstrapped perspective. What can I do that will give me the biggest lift in the shortest amount of time? COVID is happening. We're not certain about the product, but because it's brand new, an event, yeah, there's already a few thousand people that meant to go there. So for sure, it's that point of like when something is impossible, it's just a matter of figuring out how is it possible. And I think that I just like to take that route whenever I need to, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, and the need to is probably the key. I think we end up engaging with a lot of people who, again, we kind of coined this term here on the show, forced fractional. So it wasn't a choice, right? They've made their career maybe in a nonlinear sort of way. So the resume is, when you show a resume to a recruiter and they don't see A plus B equals C, then that goes out the window. But a lot of people, they're part of a layoff and they don't have a resume path that makes it easy for them to go compete in the job market. And they find themselves in this forced situation where I'm going to have to start an independent career path here. And I see some overlap between what you experience and what people like that experience. So what would you say to someone who, their resume isn't valuable in the job market, but they have a tremendous amount of value based on their experience and capabilities, who finds himself
So I think that
forced
the biggest
into a
investments that
situation
I've
like
ever
this?
done were just in me, just investing my own ability to figure things out further, to learn more about where can I add value to other people. And we all have our unique skill set, and just needs to be expanded and refined into what adds value to others. So I think that whenever something like this happens, there's definitely an opportunity to tap into something greater. And maybe I'll give an example that during my early 20s, I mentioned that I used to be one of my only jobs was salesperson at the guitar shop. And because in my early 20s, that was the main focus. I was a touring musician. That's how I ended up here in the UK as well. And we got signed here and moved over and started touring around Europe, living from the back of the van. And obviously, that's not a sustainable business, especially not in the early days. During my 20s, I was a musician and got signed here in the UK. That's what allowed me to move over. And we started touring all over Europe. And we did more than 200 shows a year for a couple of years. That was a full-time job on its own to just get that thing going. But at the same time, there wasn't enough money. So I had to kind of figure out how to do things from the side as well. So as soon as I landed, one of the first things that I did was like look at the talent that I had at the time, early 20s, and what can I do? I can play guitar pretty well. And I have this kind of concept of optimization through A/B testing and all of those kind of things that I've already done through coding and through building websites and things like that. So I went on the street and I started busking up in Leeds at the time, and I basically spoke to a few buskers on the street to try and see like how much is it even worth doing. And they told me, yeah, you can do it 4 hours a day or something like that. It's $20 is what you get pretty much an hour. To me at the time, that was like, okay, that's amazing as a starting point. But then comes in the grit, and this is really the point of all of this, is that instead of just doing the 4 hours like the the guy next to me did. I showed up at 7 a.m. and I left at 6 p.m. and I played straight throughout the entire day. But not only that, I started next to the train station where you have the most amount of traffic coming out in the morning. And then as soon as 9 a.m. came about and everyone was already sitting in their offices, I walked to the city center because that's when you have the stay-at-home moms walking around with the strollers, and kind of like starting their day. And then lunch comes about, so you gotta move to the food court and set up shop over there and do an hour, and then go back at 5 p.m. You go back to the train station when everyone is going back home. And so I was able to optimize it from $20 an hour to $160 an hour, just by being in the right place in front of the right audience, and yeah, just like leaning more. So I ended up doing more than 1,000 a day busking, just because over time I kind of refined and figured out what are the paths, where can my skills be most valuable in that simple scenario.
This is such a good, it's like an object lesson for the entrepreneur, right? You took some time to figure out where was the most valuable place to be and who was the person that would most respond to the music that you were creating, rather than just doing what the other people on the street were doing. Don't just follow the crowd, but take the time and figure out where to be.
Yeah, and that was
who
like
to
the
sell
first
to.
layers. Is after solving these ones, you can go really deep. It ended up at a place of if I put a jacket instead of a box, you get a little bit more. If you put a few notes in there, you get a little bit more. If you put your hair down, you get more than if your hair is up. If you sit, which is like the opposite of what I thought, if you sit, you get more than when you stand, because it looks a little bit more effortless and like you're doing this regularly. If you look in someone in the eye, you actually get less than when you don't. So there's a lot of these like key small. This is literally those A/B tests that I ran throughout the day. Because even the music played was different in different times of day. So in the morning, you would start with like slow blues. People are coming into the office. They're still in their morning kind of thing. But towards the afternoon, a little bit more like upbeat stuff was a lot more kind of successful, in that sense. So yeah, so my music career was just about art. I do what I want. But when it comes to this was like, how can I just maximize me standing outside in the sun? So it didn't really matter. And I just did what I needed to.
Oh, this is so much fun because there's the A/B testing requires you to try something that you know very well may not work. In fact, if it doesn't
Right.
work, it gives you valuable information. And so I think there's a fear of if I try this or I try that and that doesn't work, then that's a failure. And so we try to avoid having the failure experiences. But from what you're saying, the more things that you tried, the more you found out what didn't work. So you could stop doing
And in
that
fact,
and
a lot
do
of the
what
things that did
does
work
work.
were things that were completely counterproductive to what you would think. And so that was one of the interesting learnings there, especially around then being brought back into digital marketing and product building. Some of the things that you would, from your perspective, would be the least effective were actually the ones that were the most potent.
How does performance, I mean, I guess these are all elements of performance, learning how to perform in a way that's most valuable to your audience. But how does music performance translate to you now as an entrepreneur? And maybe we covered that already, but are there more cool lessons that come to mind from your life as a music
I
performer
think that
that
a
have
whole
helped you
lot,
in business?
because now looking back, basically we had a very small TAM for the band, like a target, the audience, or because we were
Mm.
very niche, it was hard rock, like we did what we loved, and it was like the AC/DC style type of thing. But the market is pretty small when you're thinking about that from this perspective, if you want to make it big. So aligning your goals to the potential is something that I learned later on, being in product and running companies. Especially if you're trying to build something that is massive, it's important that you would have a big enough audience at the end, but a very specific focus in the beginning. You know what I mean? Because the vision expands and the ability to serve more people expands with more resources that you have, but you need to make sure that there is that ability to have that bigger vision if that is the goal. And so I think that was a very important lesson from there, that the TAM matters. But another part is that really music is you do the exact same exercises as when you are an entrepreneur. If you think about this, you especially if you're building products or writing code or stuff like this, you learn a language, you create something out of nothing, you put it out there in a form of a sellable product, and then you go out and market this to try and get more eyeballs on this so that more people buy it, basically. And that would be a similar definition to any product that is pretty much out there. But then a lot of the decisions made along the way are crucial. I think that the main difference between that and a product is that very few people care about music, or at least willing to pay for music. So you already have that uphill battle, and that teaches you a lot about how to be scrappy and savvy with limited resources, how to do things on your own. And okay, we need a website. Let's learn how to build it. Okay, we need to have some t-shirts out there. Okay, let's figure out how to print these things out and how to ship them across different places. And okay, we need to book a tour. How do we do that? All right, we need spreadsheets and do cold outreach and book those, which is very similar again to the things that we do now for sales in exactly that same way. And there's logistics involved with it, and in most cases, you don't have any support in terms of figuring all of these things out. And so, to me, that was a huge opportunity to learn things that later on became super useful, especially as a solo entrepreneur and things like that, because you gotta get it all done yourself. You can't rely on anyone else because you can't even see the prospect of making money from it in the immediate. So you just crack on with it.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is especially interesting for people also who come from a background that doesn't include sales. A lot of people move into a fractional, a solopreneur because they have a particular skill, whether it's in finance or leadership or marketing or, for me, human resources. They take a craft that they've been honing and think, okay, I'm ready to sell that. I'm ready to deliver this as an individual, as an independent, apart from, another company. But then there's this whole entire skill set of business development that, like, we haven't been developing our whole entire life. So now I've got to figure out how to do business development at a high enough level to build a successful company. And that's sometimes a big bridge
I
to
agree with that for
cross
sure. And
for someone.
remember at the agency, and that exact point is what usually creates for smaller operators that feast and famine concept, right? Because when you have to, you do it. Pick up the phone or you show up and you get a sale. You get someone to work with, or else we wouldn't be here in the first place. But once you get that client, then it's like, okay, now I'm going to deliver, and you stop the biz dev activity in the vast majority of cases. This is what in the agency model specifically, it creates these fluctuations constantly, up and down, and there's no revenue stability in the earlier days because of that. And so I learned the hard way to treat this like leg day. You don't want to do it, but you have to do it. And every Tuesday for me, it was already pre-booked in the calendar that Tuesday is biz dev day. Literally like that, the entire day is biz dev day. And so you just sit there and you're not allowed to work on client projects. You're not allowed to work on any kind of passion projects you may have. This is what the calendar is telling us that we should do today. So you just figure it out. And as long as you do it consistently over time, it always works, as long as you have good skills as well, to back it up.
Yeah. So what are some of the activities that you think have the biggest ROI? If there's a new entrepreneur, micro agency founder listening, that you would say, hey, if you're carving out one day of the week exclusively for business development,
Should you do?
what are good ways to spend your time, and what are ways that you found are a huge waste of time?
So
but you maybe would think it would be good.
Things that are maybe it's not waste of time in the long run. Producing content, producing just putting information out there or interacting on social media. In the long run, this is something that moves the needle. It's just a slow burn. When you're in the famine stage of the feast and famine kind of wheel, then you can't allocate a lot of resources to this. So things that are a lot more actionable and can move the needle really quickly is leveraging the existing relationships that you already have, because the way that most small businesses acquire business, especially in the consulting space and the agency space and these kind of things, is through referrals. But most people don't ask And that's where it usually breaks down. And so one thing that I did is, instead of focusing on creating another blog post to our website that would take me, at the time, now with ChatGPT, you can do it really quickly. But at the time, it was a 4 hour thing that you would sit down and write it up and go through it and read it again and, all those kind of stuff. Instead of that, sending an email to all of the existing customers and telling them about this new advance in technology, this new opportunity that you have to help them, because you learned a new skill and you found a new tool that you think would be helpful in that way or this way. So I had a very basic rudimentary version of a CRM, which was just like a Trello board with all the clients sitting on there. And during my Tuesday morning, the first thing I would go there and look at all of the existing customers that I already had, whether they're active or not, in past customers, and just to try and think of what can I do for them, how can I add value to them, because these are the ones that already agreed to pay me money. There's a saying that it's 80% easier to sell to an existing customer than to a brand new one. And so let's start where it's a lot easier, 80% easier, in fact, So that was the first thing. And then over time, it became this kind of monthly sequence that I sent to all of the customers. So one Tuesday, I just sat and wrote 12. Yeah. And then it's just a sequence that goes to all of them. So I'm top of mind. And that was designed more as a marketing, kind of more as a newsletter, with like a design and blocks and things like this. The point was not to get them to do anything about the stuff that I sent 12 times a year. Is that I'm top of mind when they have other things that come to mind, because they're getting my emails. They are useful, but they're not action driven. They're more about authority, building my authority, sharing information, and trying to provide value through those emails. But then when I'd reach out, it wasn't out of the blue, because some in the first few times that I did this, it was like, I haven't heard from you in 2 years. What have you been up to? And I was like, yeah, I've been doing this and that, and it's a bit of an awkward conversation for the first time. But if they see you consistently every single month, then it's only logical that you would reach out and ask them, how is it going? What's the next thing that you're working on? What's your goal for this year? What's the next big thing for you, that you want to achieve? Let me see if I can have some ideas and add some value in there and be generous in that way. And that brought in a lot of business and a lot of recurring business later on. So that was a big part of it. And then one thing that worked super well to bring in new customers was lumpy mail. And that was something that I didn't really keep in mind, but I just kind of picked it up from an article I read at the time. And it basically meant that if you get a package or way that is lumpy, I don't remember the stat, but it was like 5 times, 7 times, 10 times more likely that people will open it compared to just sending an email or sending a letter or something like this, And so, yeah, lumpy mail.
Lumpy
And
mail.
so
Okay, I like it.
leaned into that. And our niche at the time with the agency was nonprofits. We're working on a lot of nonprofits here in the UK. And so I'd sent flower seeds. I just went to like a Poundland, which is like a dollar shop, and I bought a bunch of these like boxes of seeds that if you just put a little bit of water, you would get some nice flowers in there. You don't need, it comes with the dirt and with everything. It's just like a all-in-one type of box for £1. Yeah. And I would go and scrape the lists and find the people that are relevant. Would film a 2 to 5 minute video of me reviewing their homepage and telling them why there's some gaps here that we can improve. Would print out a letter that gives them like a QR code on this to watch the video with that package, and then would ship that out. 2 days later, I would send an email that would reference that I hope you got my gift, and like something like that. And that really built the business, that exercise. I did that about 200 times, and we got a whole bunch of business just on the back of this.
It's fascinating. I'm taking notes myself here.
Because
some great ideas.
You can't stack lumpy mail in a letter. It's always going to be on the top
Right.
of the pile, until it gets opened.
Right. So either someone's forced to throw it away or open it and deal with it. Yeah, that's right. No, I like that. And then your email strategy earlier, you're not talking about
No.
a newsletter, right?
Just
a
for the
generic
existing customers.
generated.
Yeah.
You're talking about personal
No,
connection
the monthly
from,
ones
yeah.
were generic from Ace Digital London, which was the name of the agency at the time, and we would send that to all of the customers every single month. But that was scheduled. So after doing it a couple of times and seeing that people are actually opening them up, there's all right. Let me just write 12 in one day, and then you're done for the year, you know. And so I would reference sometimes to an ebook that we had from before or a piece of content that I had. GDPR was big at the time here in the UK, and so that was like a big opportunity. Is like, are you GDPR ready? These laws are coming. This thing is coming. You know, there's so many. If you know your niche, you know your space. There's always something coming that other people need to align around, or a new regulation, a new technology advance, or you know, before GDPR, it was responsive. And then it was Google's speed kind of thing, right? After that, the speed, the page speed score, you know, and these are all easy wins that allow you to re-engage, and there's always stuff like that.
Yeah. No, such good advice, such good practical, actionable advice. Thanks, Vito. That's really valuable for me personally, and I know it is for our audience. Yeah, really appreciate you sharing. Thinking about your agency summit that you shared with earlier, who is an ideal attendee for that? Who should be, thinking, maybe I should carve out some time for that, and where can people find information on how to
So usually
get
it
there,
happens
and
around
when will it be?
April every year. It's an online event, completely free. The folks that usually come in are anything from freelancers that are building websites for clients to folks that are working inside organizations that are in charge of the website or the marketing function, all the way to sometimes folks from Fortune 500 companies that are either already users of ours that are just kind of like want to pick up some more tips and ideas around design, around business savviness is a big part of this. So really, the way that we're looking at this is that there's a bunch of events in the space that focus on the design specifically, or like WordCamp is about WordPress, you know. So they would teach you about the blocks and the new plugins and all those kind of things, which is super valid for that kind of type of event. In Figma's event, that's the same thing. They would talk about the new feature or the new thing that happens in their ecosystem. But we wanted this to be that business event. And so we have folks coming in talking about HR, like you did at the time, or folks giving any suggestions about how they're generating new traffic from clients, how they're delivering with their customers, how they're squashing the delivery time for projects that they're working on internally within the team or with clients. And, you know, so it's a lot broader from a perspective of workflow and generating business in the agency world.
Great. So you don't
No, not at
necessarily
all.
have to be the technologist. If you have a business
100%.
interest,
Like
there's probably
the
something here
folks
for
that are
you
looking
content wise.
for the talking about code, there's other events, not necessarily ours, you know. There is, so we break it down to these four categories, and it starts from the learn how to build properly. And that's different if you're building for clients compared to if you're building internally. So there's a distinction there. And then after that, it's about starting to build the small team around you. You already have enough work that you're at max capacity. What do you do next? Do you hire? Do you outsource? How do you keep the ball rolling? And then once you have those first few hires, how do you keep the payroll going? Because the responsibility rises. So that's the second step, and kind of that expand, as we call it. Then you have scale. So now we have a business, we have a few team members. How do we take this to the next level? What are some success stories from others? And then the last category is thrive. That's where we bring amazing success stories from large either agencies or design teams that lead, pull the curtain and show behind the scenes as to what they do, how do they get there. Everything is just actionable advice as much as possible from there. My favorite is the thrive one. It's all about mindset and building your future kind of thing.
Great. No, I'm looking forward to that also. A couple of quick other questions. Favorite
Eddie Van
musician of
Halen.
all time? Okay,
Yeah,
the
for sure. I have him
guitarist in you,
tattooed on my
right?
back here, like a massive
Connecting there.
jumping Eddie since I was 17.
Awesome. Most favorite venue or location where you've played as a musician?
My favorite one was Ozfest. We were warming up, we were opening up for Ozzy in Tel Aviv at the time. And that was an incredible experience. And there was another one in London, the Electric Ballroom, where on the first day of the first tour that we had abroad, it was here in London. And we went to see The Darkness. If you remember The Darkness, they were playing there at the Electric Ballroom. And I remember I turned to my drummer at the time. I told him in 2 years, we were on that stage. And literally to the week, 2 years later, we were doing our album launch on that stage, which was very exciting.
That is so cool. How can people find out about you as a musician and
No,
find any of
well,
your work
you
there?
can look for Chase
Is it
the
out
Ace. You
there?
might find some old stuff, but that's like nowadays. The guitars that are here behind me are mostly like Zoom background, and I play once a year at Cloudfest. That is like a big event in the cloud space, where we join on stage like a few CEOs and C-level folks from different technology companies, and we play in a band called the Lords of Uptime in a cloud event that goes very well. So that I give myself once a year, but for the rest of the time, it's me here working in the office or with my two kids spending some time. And you can find us, and so you can find a lot more about this
Love it.
or about me. You can find me on LinkedIn, Vito Peleg, or on X, Vito Peleg as well. Or of course, come on and join Atarim for free, atarim.io.
Very good. Thank you so much for sharing, Vito. Super fun talking to you. Very helpful. And yeah, cheering for you and Atarim and looking
Thanks,
forward
Lance.
to
It was,
the
it was a
next Web
pleasure.
Agency
Thank you.
Summit.